3 years on, as the world continues to battle the pandemic that first originated in China's Wuhan, a US Senate report has now shed absolute light on the high likelihood that COVID was brought on the world due to a lab-related incident in Wuhan and not natural zoonotic origins as it was claimed by the country of China. The report, titled An Analysis of the Origins of the COVID-19 Pandemic, investigated the two theories of COVID origin. Number one, the natural zoonotic spread from Wuhan's seafood market, and number two, leak due to a lab-related incident. Overwhelming evidence cited in the report points to a lab leak. The report highlights earliest calls of the virus reported from around Wuhan Institute of Virology, lack of an intermediary 3 years later, as well as biosafety hazards emanating from Wuhan laboratories. Before we open up the discussion, let's tell you about the findings of the report in detail. But before that, let me also introduce our guest for today. Ambassador Deepak Vora, former diplomat, joins me on the program. Dr. Anil Arora, gastroenterologist, also joins us on the broadcast. Dr. Sanjeev Bagai, chairman of Nephron Clinic, Padma Shri awardee, is also here with us. And last but no means the least, Professor Madhav Nalapad, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, also joins us on the show. In fact, I'm going to go to the plasma screen and try and take you through 8 detailed analysis that NewsX has done, which also takes excerpts from the report which point to what really was found out in this report and how damning this could be for China. In fact, the first excerpt, the first finding from this report, clearly and palpably says that reasonable to conclude. When they say reasonable, it means it's absolutely clear to conclude that the COVID-19 pandemic was likely then not the result of a research-related incident. What this means is that China was absolutely doing something which was below the table when it came to either evolution of viruses or biochemicals, and that's when this particular accident took place. Finding number 2 also talks about that the research-related incident is more likely the origin of the SARS-CoV-2, and this is the only theory which is substantial enough, which started the COVID-19 pandemic and demonstrated that it was a result of a research-related incident. And this was something that China very vociferously tried to hide and conceal. Moving on, the finding also talks about the spillover effect, which also appears to have occurred in Wuhan or closely surrounding areas. Very, very practical and pragmatic to assume that if Wuhan was the epicenter of this particular virus, then the lab which has been talked about in these particular findings is also the reason why this virus came out. And moving further out, the earliest calls for assistance located near the campus were obviously from Wuhan. There were inexplicable ailments being reported on a daily basis in Wuhan hospitals. The doctors did themselves not know what was going on. And as we are also very, very familiar with the fact that the number of the doctors who died in Wuhan initially for the lack of a proper prognosis was also extremely high. Again, clearly pointing to what these findings are reiterating, something we have talked about on NewsX very many times. Missing evidence of a natural zoonotic spillover. Now remember, viewers, that this is the pretext that China has often pushed forward, saying that we had nothing to do with this. This was a phenomena which occurs in nature, and that's exactly what this report has also snubbed and debunked. In fact, the research on SARS-related coronavirus with pandemic potential is something which was already going on in these particular labs. They were being funded from a number of illegal channels from around the world. What they were working on perhaps was also a nefarious design that China has often emanated in its philosophy towards other countries as well. The second last finding, in fact, wherever this spillover took place or this accident took place, they maintained to in fact keep biosafety capabilities at its highest containment. And this is the reason why a number of these doctors fell ill. In fact, even the people who were part of this spillover accident were also dead after this virus spread across. And through 2019, the experts published challenging biosafety and biosecurity conditions faced by high containment laboratories in China. Remember that first up, when it came out in February and March, it was only Wuhan. But what this report is also talking about is that, the virus in fact leaked somewhere close to November or December of 2019, and China tried to keep it under wraps, but the scale of the explosion of the spread of this virus was so high that they could not do it after a point in time. I'm going to rope in our guests who are going to give us details of what they think, and something which is common knowledge to us as well as the entire world, that this is something that China tried to hide. I'm going to start with Dr. Bagai. Dr. Bagai, if you can hear me. Dr. Bagai.
Yeah.
Dr. Bagai, this is something that you and I have spoken of. We have spoken about this during the gloom and the depths of COVID-19 when we were all cooped up in our houses. We were really wondering as to what really happened. And we did talk about whether this is something that China tried to conceal. And so we also tried to talk about why this could have happened. And all of that has turned it into this Eureka movement, which has been also corroborated in this particular report.
Hi, good afternoon. Am I audible?
I can hear you, sir. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think it will be completely inconceivable on anyone's part to think that China is an honest country. The complete global jokes. There is overwhelming scientific evidence for the last 2.5, 3 years that it originated from China, much that they try to deny it. They are serial offenders, they are outliers, it's an opaque and closed society, they have no value of human lives, and their trademark is to lie. Now, just go through sequentially, point form, because the chronological set of events is extremely important to establish their culpability. It's called as SARS-CoV-2 as a novel COVID virus. It's called as COVID-19 because it was announced in end of 19, but China knew of it, and the first set of patients with COVID-like symptoms were admitted very close to Army Hospital near Wuhan district in around September, October 2019. The precious 2 or 3 or 4 months before WHO declared it a pandemic in February 2020 was lost. Most of the labor force from China was going into south of Europe, mainly into Italy, and it spread like wildfire there. Likewise in Southeast Asia and rest of the world. Point number 2, we know that the origin could be 2, either a wet market or biosafety levels which were not maintained in these kind of virology labs. It's been proven now completely clearly that it was a lab leak, so it debunks all their theories and defenses apart. But the real moot point is they have not allowed any sensible investigation, because they are insensitive global citizens, to take place in their country. After 3 years, it is almost a chance of zero finding any evidence. They would have fudged the data, they would have eliminated all records. They should have allowed, and I think WHO is equally party to it because it was compromised. They could not conduct an adequate inquiry. Next point is they have fudged the data sequentially for the last 3 years. We have no idea of what kind of mutations are taking place in China. The cases are still there. We are seeing it. We are reading about it. We don't know the case fatality rate. We don't know the kind of sequencing which they're trying to establish. And there is free flow of global traffic in terms of airlines all over the world. The vaccines have been a failure. It's failed even to protect their own citizens. All the countries which imported their vaccines in a hurry have actually dumped them into the dustbin and have opted for other makes. And last, most importantly, is even at this stage, China needs to come clean. It is highly unlikely, but it is extremely important that all the powers of the world put pressure on China, isolate them. They cannot live a life alone. They are under a myth. But if there is global collaboration, absolutely sure China must pay a price. They have devastated the world medically, socially, financially, and psychologically. Put a price on China. That's the tagline.
Absolutely. And Professor Nalapad, now that things are returning back to normal, the world has suffered this huge dent because of COVID-19. Do you feel that despite, the kind of damage inflicted upon the world at the behest of China, they relatively have gotten away scot-free?
Well, Vineet, it's no surprise for the simple reason that China was not alone. They had funding from the United States. Peter Daszak and the Chinese Batwoman, both of them were collaborating in developing this virus. Then they have collaborated in developing other viruses. And in my view, this could have been as some kind of a prospective biological war scenario in which regrettably American scientists were involved, American money was involved. And that is one of the reasons why you saw such a lot of reluctance to really investigate the origins of COVID. But if you do that, you would have identified the co-conspirators as well. I talked at that point in time to experts not only in India, but in Tokyo, in the United States, and as well as in China. And frankly, they were unanimous that this was an inadvertent lab leak from the Wuhan lab. And frankly, even a grade 4 lab, leaks are known to occur. Every year, about 5 or 6 such leaks occur. It is not, it's not impossible. It happens. And the difficulty is the Chinese and their American collaborators put a spin on it. So much of a spin that I asked each of the 9 people that I contacted, top experts in the world, please write something for Sunday Guardian. Nobody had they said, no, if we do that, we'll be drummed out of the profession. We'll be excoriated as conspiracy theorists. We won't be able to face people again because the pressure on us to keep quiet is so much. It's not just China. These are American scientists who have spoken to me. These are basically doctors in Japan who have spoken to me. It's not just in China. It's a police state. Dr. Bagai is right. It's in the United States. It's in Japan. These are not police states. They said no, because in the profession, there's some kind of a cover-up going on. And the reason was you had people like Dr. Fauci at the top of the profession. Fauci at his peak, when the COVID pandemic struck, could have destroyed the career of any doctor. With the result, I'm sorry to say, the medical profession kept silent about facts that it knew, and as a consequence, the world went further into chaos.
Absolutely. Ambassador Vora, sir, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Well, what do you make of this, sir? I'm sure you're not surprised seeing this report. This is something that we have been speculating. This is something we have been deliberating and talking about for a very, very long time. But the fact of the matter still is, will China be punished? Will China be, in fact, be met with ostracization for the damage that it has caused to the world? There is an economic winter being talked about, sir, and all of that has been precipitated by the callousness as well as the lack of human life, lack of concern for human life, rather, at the behest of China.
Thank you very much, sir. Always a pleasure to be on NewsX, to learn from you, from Padma Shri Dr. Sanjeev Bagai, from the outstanding Professor Madhav Nalapat, and from Dr. Anil Arora. You asked a very relevant question. The answer is very simple. 3 things cannot be hidden for long, said the Gautama, the Buddha: the sun, the moon, and the truth. The question of the origins of the Chinese virus, like Hiranyakashipu, the Asura king, he had a boon from Brahma that made him almost indestructible. So the questions about the origins of the virus, they would keep resurfacing like a bad penny, with new evidence every day of Chinese culpability. And the report that you have just cited is the latest evidence. They're saying that this virus upended our lives, caused so much of damage. There had been a similar report earlier, I think it was in August last year, that they had talked about the virus being a master escape artist, getting out of a lab where they were working on making pathogens more powerful and help them to infect humans. Of course, Ding Ling's communist regime will deny any culpability, so you don't expect them to acknowledge their guilt and render themselves liable to pay the damage to the global economy, estimated as of date at some US dollars 30 trillion. Now, let me just say one more thing, sir. Did the virus accidentally leak from the lab, or was it deliberately pandemicized to test its potency on humans? Sounds far-fetched? I recommend to the millions of people watching this show to see the 1999 Hollywood film Bats, in which a demented scientist genetically modifies bats to become the ultimate predator, specifically targeting humans. His creation ultimately kills him. Our national motto in India, sir, you're a foreign service kid. Our national motto is Satyamev Jayate, truth always triumphs. Communist China's motto is Truth is for the Martians. The great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation can only be achieved through deceit, lies, and treachery. Waiting for the Chinese to acknowledge their culpability, sir, is like waiting for Godot, who doesn't exist.
Dr. Anil Arora, if you can hear me, sir. Dr. Arora, if you're there with us.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well, so is it right to say that the cat is out of the bag? Or do you think that even if it's out now, it really doesn't make a difference? We already knew what happened, where it happened, who was trying to conceal it. Professor Nalapat also said that senior people, from the industry who were privy to the truth were, in a position of precarity where they could not talk about what really went down in Wuhan.
Thank you, Vineet, for having me on your show. What really bothers me and troubles me after listening to the three big wigs on your show is it that why, as a bunch of 190 countries, we still feel helpless, knowing very well where the virus originated, what was a malicious design made by the Chinese authorities, and how did they so opaquely and brazenly try to suppress the information whatever was available way back in September and October of 2019. Why is it that every time you have to pin down the scientists, every time you have to bow to them, every time you have to buckle down in front of Chinese? What is the point of having a united nation? What is the point of having a supreme body like US who cannot call cat a cat? When will it happen? Even what Dr. Nalapat is saying, that we know that there was a theory of even a biological warfare. So even if they had not agreed to whatever had happened in the past, why can't we make them accountable now? Don't we have any international agency? Well, if we leave them untouched now, and if we can let them go scot-free, what is the guarantee they're not going to repeat the same thing again? The misery of the virus, the continuation of the emergence of the sub-variant strains, and even we do not know what is happening now. The fact that they are going to have a zero tolerance policy, that means the number of the cases in China is still very high. So if the number is still high, they may still be exporting more and more viruses as the Chinese airlines are not shut down. So why is it not that we make them accountable even now? What holds us back?
That's a great point, actually. Dr. Bagai, if I can come back to you. Dr. Bagai?
Yeah. I think,
well, Dr. Bagai, what is the deterrent for the future? Everything is back to normal now. Flights are operating between China and the rest of the world. Have we just become complacent that something like this is not going to happen again? Where are the checks and balances against going in and out of China?
Yeah, so Vineet, the important points here is that Japan still has rising cases. There are at least 11 states in US which has rising cases. UK still has a huge surge of cases. So has France and so on. But unfortunately, we have no information of China. Apart from the fact that the world is complacent, I think it's easy just to turn a blind eye to something which looks troublesome. And I must say that India should take a lead in forming a consortium in which it holds China accountable. India has the power, political, financial, and the moral strength to ask these questions. There are world bodies, which my colleague mentioned, they are defunct. Be it the UN body, be it WHO, they are not only compromised, it's better not to have them. There were bodies like them which didn't even mention that the infection is airborne for a precious 4 months and allowed the infection to spread. So I think we need at least a 4 or 5 or 6 nation consortium. We need a platform body to confront China and make them pay. There is an international judiciary tribunal which exists in Europe. There are international crime tribunals. This is nothing short of mass murder, nothing short of war crimes. If 20 years later, Yugoslavia, the leaders were held accountable, this is the time Mr. ZI and PI and XYZ should be held accountable.
Right. And Professor Nalapat, one would wonder that, Xi Jinping's, governance and his style would be challenged after this kind of a pandemic. But here we are, having Xi Jinping being elected and sworn in as, the ruler for Lord knows how many more years.
Well, Vineet, the good news is that Xi Jinping may not be challenged by governments of different countries. Let's be honest. When Australia dared to suggest an independent investigation into COVID, what happened? Immediately, the government of Scott Morrison was subjected to Chinese boycott of purchases from Australia, steel, coal, etc., with the result that Australian businesses lost billions of dollars. Everybody blames Scott Morrison, and the poor chap lost the election. So the Chinese are absolutely ruthless in ensuring that they act in a manner that they cannot be held accountable. And I don't expect that to happen. The fact is, across the world, people know they were lying. They were being economical with the truth. And they were concealing facts about the COVID-19. As you correctly said, I think Dr. Bagai, or the fact is, if there is an animal vector, at the end of 3 years, you're not come up with a single animal, neither a bat, nor a bird, nor a reindeer, nor anything. Don't tell me that you could not have come up with a vector, because the Chinese would have the biggest incentive to find a vector. They can't find a vector that will be there and sustained in scientific evidence. So there's no vector. It was a lab leak. Frankly, Vineet, even in my case, I used to hint in my writings that it could be this, it could be a lab leak. I was told very clearly, if I write straight out that it's a lab leak, number one, I'm not allowed to quote anybody, none of the 9 top experts who told me that. And secondly, immediately a campaign will be launched against me that I'm some kind of a wild-eyed conspiracy theorist. And nothing I say should be taken seriously, including on various aspects of geopolitics. I mean, this kind of medicine involves geopolitics, but frankly, this is not my field. I was told, please don't make that mistake. We need to hear your voice. Your voice has to remain credible. Don't write about it. There's been, frankly, a veil of secrecy. And the good news is that if the Republican Party comes to power in the House and Senate, they are going to open an inquiry into this. And they are going to hold to account Dr. Fauci. Peter Daszak, the WHO chose him as the expert to investigate the virus that he himself, along with that Zheng something or the other, helped to create. So somebody commits a murder and then he becomes the chief of police investigating the murder. What are you talking about? So let's be honest. As of now, I don't expect anything. As Dr. Bagai, who's both Dr. Bagai and Dr. Arora are celebrated doctors, as Dr. Bagai says, any last trace of evidence would have been wiped clean in the first 6 months. The Chinese are very thorough. When you go there, you'll be given a certain amount of noodles and hot chicken soup, but no evidence worthwhile. You only get planted evidence, which is fake.
All right. Well, that's what the world fell for. Ambassador Vora, noodles and mixed with chicken is what China used to basically cull these investigations. We've run out of time. I'm going to take concluding thoughts from Ambassador Vora and Dr. Arora. Completely out of time. Ambassador Vora, starting with you, sir.
Yeah, I just want to say, sir, that no credible epidemiologist in the world has shown evidence that the virus originated anywhere but in China. I was in Brazil 2 years ago when the brave Brazilians were holding up placards outside the Chinese embassy. China lied. People died. We have long COVID coming. Our 2 doctors, Dr. Bagai and Dr. Arora, the best in the world, know what it is, sir. And as long as China continues to lie, people will continue to die.
Absolutely. Well said, sir. Dr. Arora?
Yeah, I think we need, even now, they continue to have totally opaque policies. The fact that even in Tibet today, there have been extensive, massive protests against the zero tolerance induced lockdowns and unemployment. And in the high time, somebody makes them accountable, and to know, even if they have lied in the past, they should come back with the truth now. What is the status? How many subvariants have originated? And till how long will they keep on exporting the new variants, which may be catastrophic in the times to come?
Absolutely. And still, the danger looms large because China, despite the travesty it has rendered upon the world, continues to be opaque when it comes to its revelations and, in fact, its cooperation in determining how COVID came about and what will be, the next virus coming out of that country. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this conversation.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.